Welcome, everyone. I appreciate everyone taking their time out for today's webinar and looking forward to sharing some knowledge and having a great time. So thank you all. I am Frank Stevens, and I'm going to begin my intro a little bit later, but as you can see, I brought in some really big heavy hitters and industry leaders because this is an important topic. So today we're going to be discussing security framework that is required for all organizations that work with the Department of Defense. That framework is called CMMC, or Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. So as I mentioned, hello again. My name is Frank Stevens. I'm the CEO of Computing Technology Solutions, and I'm going to be today's webinar host. CTS has been a technology partner for over 25 years, and one of our key industries is manufacturing. And so today I brought with me Mark, who is going to be our moderator. Mark is with High Wire Overwatch. They have been a strategic partner of CTS for several years when it comes to cybersecurity for our clients and compliance. So Mark, thank you for your time and being a moderator today.
You're welcome. Hey, thanks, Frank, for having me and for the fantastic partnership that you have with High Wire Networks Overwatch. We value and appreciate you.
Thank you much.
I'll give you a little bit of background. So my name is Mark Dallmeier. I'm the Chief Revenue, Chief Marketing Officer for High Wire Networks Overwatch. 6-time founder, 3-time CEO of various technology, cybersecurity, and managed services companies. Today with me, I have an incredible panel. And what I'd like to do next is I'd love to have the panel briefly introduce themselves, and we will get right into the mix of this conversation. And we'll start with Kim Jones.
Thanks, Mark. I'm Kim Jones. I'm the CISO of High Wire Overwatch. I'm the person who drives Mark crazy in the background as I secure the infrastructure. 38 years in intelligence, risk, and security, 16 of those years sitting the CISO chair, the bulk of those being in financial services organization and global 1,000 companies. I'm also an educator. I've taught at ASU, I've taught at Berkeley, still teach at Berkeley, and still teach, train, and lecture around the world. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Kim. Fernando.
Yep, Fernando Machado, Managing Principal and CISO at Cybersec Investments. I'm a lead CMMC assessor, and our organization is an authorized CMMC third-party assessment organization, and we've been in the space for nearly 15 years in the DoD space.
Incredible. Thank you so much. And Dr. David.
Yeah, hello, everybody. Dave Boulay, Service President of IMEC. It's the Illinois Manufacturing Excellence Center. We're an economic development organization helping manufacturers, small and mid-sized manufacturers, plan, implement, and excel by implementing best practices in a wide range of areas, from leadership, market growth, operational improvement. No doubt about it, cybersecurity, one of those hot topics that we're going to get into today. We work with about 3,000 manufacturers in the past year in the state of Illinois, so it gives us a little different lens that I'll share today on what we're seeing with the small and mid-sized manufacturers. Just happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, one of the things that we are asking for the participants in the webinar today to do is to document your questions, hold your questions. We're actually going to be asking you to chat your questions, but we will handle a Q&A around those questions towards the end of the discussion. We value and appreciate your feedback, your input, and your collaboration. What I will also mention is that we are giving away a special giveaway at the end, so please stick around to the end, and I hope that special person wins. So we're going to cover some very interesting, meaty topics today around the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. So first of all, what is CMMC awareness? There is a significant amount of cybersecurity maturity model and cybersecurity fatigue in the marketplace within various industries, including manufacturing and the defense industry base. So we're going to talk about that with some of our experts. There are a number of common misperceptions about CMMC, what CMMC is, and why it was developed in the first place. CMMC impact on business. This type of regulatory compliance framework, oversight, governance, regulation has a direct impact on your organization's operations, your revenue, and your profitability. So we're going to be speaking about that. The risks of failing to achieve CMMC are significant and can impact revenue, could impact your corporate valuation as well as your future growth. And then really, to wrap it up, how did the panel of experts believe that you could turn CMMC into your own unfair advantage? And with that, into the Q&A session. So we have a list of questions around these topics. And what we're going to do is we're going to open it up. So to the panel. So first question, and panel members, don't everybody jump in at the same time. But first question, in your opinion, has CMMC increased awareness across the nation and in different industries on why leadership teams and organizations should be concerned about securely handling and storing sensitive data? What say you?
Wow, the silence was deafening. So, okay.
There's your answer.
Yeah. So Mark, I will throw in, and I will throw in as usual with an unpopular, answer to that question, if for no other reason but to egg the other panelist on. I qualify, given my years, as what I affectionately called an old security guy or gal, or an OSG. That's another way of saying I'm probably older than dirt in this industry and profession. In that regard, I've seen this dance before. Most of the regulations that have come about, from the old SAS 17 to the SOC 2 to PCI to HIPAA, and the list goes on, have all been focused on trying to raise the bar regarding awareness of the importance of protecting data within the various industry verticals that they support. The reality of the situation is what they raise awareness on is not the importance, but if we don't do this, we're going to lose revenue. And we're still seeing many folks look at the regulation as an end in and of itself versus a prod to understand that this is the minimum necessary set. And the questions that I know we've got teed up later in terms of how do we turn this into a competitive advantage? How do we integrate this within the organization and structure? How do we integrate this within our culture becomes secondary to we have to get through this wicket gate. So I would contend that what you're seeing mostly is it's like, excuse my language, it's another damn wicket gate we've got to get through versus, this is important for security. No, it's another wicket gate we need to get through to drive sales and revenue. And I'm happy to have somebody on the panel dispute that for me, because like I said, Mark, you and I both know I do this just to try and throw stones and see what comes up. But I would say this feels the same as the other 5 or 6 iterations of this I've gone through in my years in the chair and my years in the profession. So what say you all?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. So one of the biggest things was that back in the day, the DoD required contractors to implement NIST 800-171 and attest to the government that they've been doing so. Then we had a breach in 2019, and when they went through and they started looking at what the contractor had implemented, the government found out they hadn't implemented anything at all. So they decided they were going to sample and just do a random non-statistical assessment of 9 contractors to see if they've implemented the requirements or if this was an isolated incident. And it turned out all 9 contractors didn't implement anything. So later that year, in the fiscal year 2020 NDAA bill, under specifically section 1646, this is where the DoD said, since self-attestation is not working and we're hemorrhaging data to third-party nation actors, we're now going to turn to a third-party verification mechanism, and CMMC was born. So yes, I think that now with the threat of the third-party verification mechanism, it has definitely opened up the eyes to a lot of the contractors out there.
So let me counter the counterpoint. As I grew up and most of my years in the chair were in financial services, I saw the advent of the PCI DSS standard. Anyone you want to take a guess as to how many breaches, and again, I understand that's a technical legal term, but I'm using it more generically. How many breaches regarding credit card data have happened for companies, or what percentage of companies that had credit card data and PCI regulated data that was exposed? what percentage of them were not compliant or certified with the data security standard? The answer is 0. Everyone that has been breached out there has been not only compliant, but certified as compliant within the environment. So while this is an important gap step, ahead of beyond the self-attestation that goes, the old security guy in me has said, I've seen this dance, I know the steps, I can call the tune, and I'm concerned regarding the real impact that we're going to see. But that doesn't mean it's a bad step, Fernando. I think we're both in agreement that some level of structure is a good thing.
And I'd add, just from the perspective of small, mid-sized manufacturers broadly, I think the headlines are what have made the awareness, right? Or we've known a peer or someone in our industry that's been caught up in ransomware. So the headlines of the cyber attacks has really brought the awareness. What I find interesting about CMMC, and maybe it's a little different twist than what we've seen over the time, is the way it's starting to give focus on this is more of a core business risk. This is more of a business strategy that may not have been necessarily there in the traditions, because we're seeing the effects on it. So the whole notion of cybersecurity is now lockstep with a resilient strategy as a business. I think that's might be a little different tune that I feel like I'm seeing these days.
So I got to ask go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Hey, David, can I double click on that comment?
Sure.
Because I agree, but I'm just wondering where the source was coming from, because that like that level of understanding, awareness, messaging, positioning was definitely not coming from the federal government. So being on the manufacturing side, being on the software side, being on the solution provider side, and the consulting side of this ecosystem, what we saw was there was a lot that was lost in translation in terms of business impact and business speak.
Mm-hmm.
That was being disseminated, right, by the government into the defense industry base and the associated industries that would be impacted by CMMC. So do you think that awareness or that understanding or the connectivity between cybersecurity maturity model certification and a specific business outcome or a specific financial outcome was being driven by the industry or the ecosystem or the vendors supporting the ecosystem, right? Or the professionals and credentialed organizations like Fernando's, who was going in saying, look, you might not understand, and you might not, Mr. or Mrs. executive or business owner, you might not be connecting the dots here. The reality is, if you do not move forward in this manner, you could lose 50, 80, 90, 100% of your revenue. Right. And at that point in time, you have no business. So is that what you were seeing? Or do you truly believe that this is something different than what we've seen before?
So yeah, it's a great question, digging into this topic. So again, we see the effects of poor cyber hygiene, right? And so we're getting that awareness. There had been conversation, I don't hear this as much now, but the conversation was, well, I'll just get the insurance. I'll get the cyber insurance, right? And therefore I'm covered.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm hearing that less. And perhaps CMMC, and particularly I'd say it's more the flow down expectations from a customer that really catches people's attention. And that helps make it more urgent and more tangible, and the business case starts to play out. So it changes perhaps the conversation that are happening with the experts in the field to help the companies work through that.
Yeah, David, and to touch on your point, it's interesting because 3 years ago, if I wanted cyber liability insurance, I can go get it pretty much from anywhere. Yeah. Now, if I try to get cyber liability insurance, a lot of the requirements that they're asking me to have in place sound very familiar to the NIST 800-171 requirements. Right. Have you implemented multi-factor authentication? Are you encrypting at rest and you're encrypting in transit? And those are just some of the control examples that I can pull from that.
Yeah. So question for the rest of the panel on that. So buried in my background that I glossed over is 11 of those 31 years where I was a warfighter. I'm a West Point grad and former Army intel officer. And also buried in that background are 2 years working in the DIB. I worked for one of the arms of General Dynamics as the deputy CISO for a while. And I sat in those environments and listened to the president of our company say, security is table stakes. Security is table stakes to what we do, particularly since what we do supports the warfighter. And if we get it wrong, that's a problem. I guess the thing that I am concerned about, and again, I believe the CMMC is an absolutely appropriate step in the right direction. I believe that this level of rigor is just adds to the ability for us to make sure that we're putting out good product, good service to folks who support all of our nation, to include the warfighters out there. I guess that conversation that I just referenced to happened 20 years ago. And the things we did were 20 years ago. If I'm listening to the panel, what I'm hearing is, despite the fact that we were doing this 20 years ago, we were an anomaly. So I guess I'm trying to figure out why that is the case. And as a former warfighter, that kind of scares me. So, what have we really changed within the environment other than forcing an issue that, particularly in our vertical, should be first and foremost? And I'm asking.
Yeah, and I wonder if that focus of the past was on the supply chains themselves and the small and mid-sized manufacturers. They're so data rich, and you know this. I mean, in the sense that I'll go with the analogy, but the lay of the land or the battlefield has changed, where the bad actors keep getting better and better, and they're seeing the weakness on the battlefield with the supply chain, right? And so whether or not that conversation of past is now, the hardening of our defenses throughout the whole supply chain, that seems to be the space, again, from our perspective, where the opportunity lies, or the work is before us, to make sure that we have a real strong defense against those bad actors.
Love the supply chain analogy. That helps. I disagree that the bad actors are getting better and better, but I'm biased. But that helps. I appreciate that. Mark, I'll go shut up now.
No, you're good, Dr. David. I think that's a great reflection, and the supply chain and the value chain point that you made is extremely important, because when you compare and contrast, right, some of the attacks, the percentage of supply chain being penetrated, not just within the defense industry base, but look at healthcare, right? Look at retail. So healthcare has been decimated, right? Their supply chain has been decimated by ransomware, by cyber attacks, DDoS, et cetera, for a decade. Not, oh yeah, for the last couple of years. No, for a decade, right? Because we were speaking about this a decade ago, about the pervasive attacks in the healthcare supply chain, and so I think that these things come in waves, right? So I think the awareness, the sensationalism, right, around regulations, around enforcement, around cyber attacks, et cetera, they come in waves, and I often shake my head in dismay when I see the media doing what the media does, and they communicate things like, "Oh, ransomware is dead," and I'm like, why would you ever communicate something like that, right? It just anyway. I could go on and on about this, but I think this leads to some of the fatigue, and we saw this not just in terms of cyber attacks or regulatory compliance. Right, we've seen this from this type of fatigue before, i.e. Desert Storm, i.e. September 11th, i.e. the Great Recession. Right, it's the public's fatigue and their awareness and their emotional disconnect that oftentimes takes place when the tsunami of news just continues to overwhelm people, and there's good and bad in that, right? Dr. David, to your point and to Frank's point earlier, you have this massive media machine that sensationalizes attacks and breaches, and it's good to increase awareness. But the reality is when you see that in the headlines every day, you become numb. And for those of us, right, that have supported tens of thousands of customers with cyber risk related services and consulting and technologies over our careers, we see that. We see that numbness. We see that fatigue. And again, I'm not saying that that's a negative. I'm just saying that that becomes a reality. And when people become numb and fatigued, they stop acting and they stop responding. And so are the experts on this call, are you seeing that fatigue? And if you are seeing the fatigue, what are you seeing counter the fatigue or the lack of response or lack of mobilization around the best practice?
Again, numbing silence. So let me part the pump again. It's going to be one of those, Mark. We've done those before. So
It's good. They're just waiting on you, Kim.
Oh boy. So what I would say is this, and again, as you know, my background isn't specifically in CMMC, but a lot of my gigs have been what my first boss used to affectionately call cleanup at aisle 5, where we've got new regulations, new challenges, and my gig is to try and move the organization along. Fatigue regarding any sort of regulatory overhead, and I put big air quotes on that, is natural. It is to be expected. It can be looked at as more work on top of the other 156 things that I've got going on in the environment. So it would surprise me to hear if I hear from the rest of the panel that we're not seeing that fatigue yet. It's gonna be out there. It is natural. I would contend that the way to combat that fatigue is to remember, as implementers and as people driving cultures, the conversation is about compliance. It's about the value thereof. Step one. What do we get? Not what do we avoid? If we don't do this, we're going to lose revenue. No. What do we get by doing this? We're going to talk later about the competitive advantage and potential unfair advantage associated with this. How do we build upon this? That's part one. Part two is I would submit not to look at compliance as a checklist. What I want to figure out, and I used to say this, and Mark, you've heard me say this, making lemonade out of lemons is easy. The goal of any good security professional is to make lemonade out of 2 apples, a grapefruit, and a kumquat and make it look easy. So how do I integrate these new requirements into my culture, into existing processes instead of tack-ons? How do I make it easy for us to go forward rather than build up a new separate vertical or a new separate process? What can I do to integrate appropriately? How do I be innovative regarding that? And when you look at compliance as a checklist of just yet another damn thing we have to do, you don't think about those things initially. And that speed to compliance can step on speed to benefit, which can cause fatigue within the environment. So I would say I'd be surprised if you're not seeing the fatigue. And the way we combat fatigue is to be creative, or as my medicine woman likes to say, to be cunning with your magic and figure out how you integrate appropriately, combined with focusing on the value proposition, not avoiding bad, but the good that comes of that. And again, I'll throw it back out.
Yeah, great reflection. And I love the shift of mindset, right? Mindset, attitude, being able to reflect on that. Dr. David or Fernando, any comments around fatigue, what you're seeing in terms of fatigue and its impact on culture and its impact on the organization and how they execute and move forward?
Yeah, we're seeing it in the marketplace. A lot of bad information on LinkedIn, right? People still referencing 5 levels of CMMC when there's 3. And then another thing too is like sometimes we'll see business owners complain about it. And so, I've jokingly said CMMC is akin a lot to like the 5 stages of grief. There's a lot of denial that people think that this is going away. Then there's bargaining. They're just going to shift the information to somebody else, right? Eventually we come around to acceptance on whether they're going to implement the requirements or not. But I think at this state, one thing's for sure, CMMC is being yelled out from the rooftops, and now the DoD is going to find out here in a couple of short months as the assessments start to go underway, who's really serious about protecting the government's data, because at the end of the day, it is the government's data that requires to be protecting.
Well said, Dr. David.
Yeah, Mark, the way you started out, describing the fatigue absolutely spot on. I think there's a couple other things. Certainly the starts and stops of CMMC, what's going to happen, has been its own set of fatigue. Layer on that just what business is going through right now, particularly, do I focus on CMMC today or how tariffs are going to affect my business, right? The breadth of priorities that companies are dealing with right now are just tremendous, and the uncertainties and how they navigate through. So I don't have much to add on the cultural, security-wise, business-wise. I think that's been well covered. I would only add the notion of progress versus perfection, a step forward every week, a little bit more, knowing that this is a business priority and there's many priorities to work on. But when you make a little bit of progress each week, get a little more done each week, it's amazing what you have done after 3 months.
Yeah, and
again, sorry, go ahead, Fernando.
Yeah, sorry about that. And Dave, perfect point on implementing requirements. And some of the things that we've seen as assessors, when we typically ask clients how long it's taken them to get from 0 to 100% ready to go for an assessment, is usually about a 6 to 8 month process. So if you haven't started at all, don't think that this is something you're going to turn the switch on and be ready to go in 2 weeks or 30 days. It's not happening.
I would add to that, plus one to what everyone has said. I would add to that, while implementation in and of itself, depending upon the size of your organization, is probably a project or a program, and I understand that, you cannot view the sustainment of those requirements as being a project or a program. Otherwise, you're going to repeat this cycle every single year. So part of that project should be, how do I integrate this? How do I sustain this? How does it become part of our heartbeat? And, Dr. Dave, to what you said, do I focus on tariffs or do I focus on CMMC? Done properly, the answer is yes. As in, how does my CMMC implementation impact positively the value proposition I have to my customers, such that I can at least partially offset the pain and suffering of the tariff situation going on. And that requires a different mindset from both the implementers, read the OSGs like me, as well as the business in terms of how you integrate into culture. Do that and it moves a little more freely and a little easier through the environment.
I love this talk track, and I love this feedback and collaboration, because what we're talking about is not specific techniques or technologies around deploying the controls and adhering to CMMC. What we're talking about
that's the easy part. I mean, seriously.
Right. What we're talking about is mindset, attitude, culture, behavior, right? And span of control. And Dr. David, I love how you said that. And how you reference, look, this is not about being perfect. It's about continuous improvement. It's about improving a little bit every day or every month, right? But moving forward. And I think that, these are some of the misperceptions, right? So we're kind of talking around this topic, but there are a lot of misperceptions when it comes to deploying a control framework or a control set of standards and the underlying technologies and the systems and policies around that. In the misperceptions can often be, to Kim's point, hey, this is a project. This is a program. This isn't a strategy, or this isn't actually part of our governance model and our risk management model in terms of how we run and operate and make decisions. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that organizations face, is they're looking at these initiatives or these activities as a standalone project versus working to integrate them into their governance model and into their running and operating and risk management model. So I'd love to hear from the panel if there are any other misperceptions that you see, that you believe, and do you think like we're on the right track? And then what I'd like to do quickly is just kind of transition into the next question, which is, can the panel share some examples of how implementing CMMC in this way could positively impact the organization and begin to lay that foundation for creating an unfair advantage.
So I'll start with a misconception I don't think we've touched on yet, which is the "it won't apply to me" misperception. So particularly the tier 2, 3, 4, and the supply chain, that they might be surprised that they're in scope. Also, companies that may not quite be in the defense supply chain today, but they see a strategy to go forward there. In other words, a revenue diversification approach, and recognizing that part of the investment to get there is going to be going down this path. So the "it won't apply to me" strategy or misconception, I think that's a reality that it should apply to many that might be unaware of that at this stage.
Well, and David, yeah, Fernando, before you jump in, and maybe this will tee you up, Fernando and Kim, but what we're seeing is other industries looking at this, watching and saying, hey, we're going to take some of these fundamental approaches and this similar framework, and we're going to move forward with implementing something similarly, just across other regulated industries. So, Fernando?
Yeah. And to Dave, to talk about what you were talking about is what I said earlier about the denial, right? Not me. It won't happen to me. So, and some other common misperceptions that people have about CMMC is they think that CMMC is this new set of requirements, and that's not it at all. All CMMC is a third-party validation of their existing DFARS requirements, specifically the organization's implementation of the NIST 800-171 security requirements. And then another piece that they've added to that is a little bit new is that if you're having a managed service provider handle a contractor's environment that's handling CUI, now that managed service provider is going to be part of that assessment scope, and the passing or the failing of that contractor rests on how well the managed service provider is implementing and handling the shared responsibility on their end as well.
And Kim, sorry, before you jump in, and we have been seeing for the last decade a growing number of attacks on service providers. Why? Because they're the aggregation point, right? Right. And so you're starting to see more and more service providers within the supply chain or the value chain get breached, get attacked, right? And so organizations like, Frank's organization, our organization, right? Others, not just in IT or cybersecurity service provider, but, other service providers, HR, healthcare, facilities management, MRO, right? They're all under attack, because the cyber criminals, right, the syndicates and the enemies of the U.S. know that they're an aggregator point for data and systems, right? They're a jump off point. And so I think that's a great reflection. Kim Jones?
No, let me add, Fernando, or dovetail on one of the things you said regarding this being an attestation or affirmation of the controls, et cetera, that you're doing or using within your environment, or should be already. I am a fervent believer, no matter how big or how small, in the concept of programmatic holistic security, that you make sure all the pieces fit together, that it encompasses at the appropriate levels the entirety of your environment. So here's the dirty little secret or head fake for folks not in the security profession. As someone who has done this before, if you were to overlay most of the regulatory requirements out there, from healthcare, from finance, from the EU GDPR requirements, from CCPA requirements, and the list goes on. Pessimistically, there's 80% overlap. Realistically, it's closer to 90. All of these things are asking you to do the same basic things, some with a little higher level of granularity, some with lower. The difference may be I'm looking at healthcare, protected healthcare information versus cardholder data information, etc. But the basic frameworks are all asking you to do the same thing. So as you begin to head down your journey, or if you're looking down or in the midst or the early phases of your journey, I like to tell people, take a half step back. What are you doing now? Are you, there are some companies who are going, oh my God, the sky is falling, because they're not doing anything. That's a problem. And I'm glad CMMC is pushing you in that direction. But if you're already doing a lot of what I will call leading practices things out there, if you lay them against what you're doing programmatically, I would contend you've got probably 10 to 15% of what I like to affectionately call happy to glad changes you need to make. And about a third of those will be I need to change my terminology and my policies to map to what CMMC is doing. As someone who's had to do this in multi-regulated environments, you're going to find that if you're already doing a lot of good things, the lift is probably not as daunting as you think it is within the environment. So don't throw out the baby with the bathwater because we have a new regulation or we have a new requirement, because I guarantee you that a lot of that is going to be the same, just maybe labeled slightly differently, or apply it to this data set as well as this data set that I'm already applying it to. So looking at it that way can maybe make it seem less daunting if you're doing the right things already.
Yeah. And I think, Kim, to your point, the keyword there is if they're doing the right things. One of the things that we're
Fair.
starting to see, one of the things that we're starting to see is when we talk about CMMC is they're not necessarily complaining about the cost of the assessment. They're complaining about the cost of the implementation of the requirements.
Yeah.
And the
You mean
time
people
that it
haven't
takes
been
to get
doing the
there.
right thing because we haven't been checking? Shocked.
Oh, shocker.
Yeah, I went to school with the grandson of General Bruce Clark, who was the first Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, and I got a chance to meet the man. And he was my mentor, but he had a saying that says a unit does well what the commander checks or causes to be checked. So copy paste to what we're doing with CMMC. If nobody's looking, things will drift. So again, that's the value proposition of, at least making sure we're looking and we're paying attention to those things.
Agreed. Mm-hmm.
Dr. David, I'd be curious because of just the sheer number of manufacturers and organizations that you collaborate with is, what are some of the examples that you're seeing within that control group of organizations beginning to go down this path and implementing some of these controls and realizing value from that process? So what are some of the reflections? What are some of the ahas that you're seeing these organizations go through?
Yeah, so we just have a great job because what was that TV show, How It's Made? We get to go into all these companies and see how it's made, right? And so it's just a blast. And related to that, I'm going to take this a little different spin on the positive business impact. So I could take you to a company, a precision machine shop. When they went down the CMMC path, they overhauled their whole IT and data management system. Right, so they improved the audits, the downtime of their system. Like there's just a massive business benefit in there. Could take you to another company because of their compliance with CMMC or hitting at that standard. It showed their maturity and reliability that got them new business with a customer. I could take you to another manufacturer that used it as a springboard to adopt quality standards, the ISO standards. I could take you to many organizations, right? Part of the requirement about the training and the awareness that's provided for employees. So what I've just noted as far as the business impact, system improvements, sales, new quality system, employee awareness, which truly transfers into the home setting. If we're getting our regular dose of training as individuals, we could take that home and be better cyber posture in our personal lives. And we're getting that from benefits from being at work. So those are just some of the business impacts that I see that are really tangential to the core of the CMMC purpose and effort.
I love that because you're talking about uplifting, right? And you're talking about uplifting the organization, uplifting the employees, uplifting the quality, uplifting the system. And so if the leaders on this call are looking for a mechanism to enable the uplift of your organization, right, and your personnel, right, and their attitudes and your differentiation, like this could be it. This could be one of those drivers, right, that you lean into. And again, they're one of my mentors, since we're talking about mentors, we know the term paranoia, right? So paranoia is when you believe that things are happening to you for a negative reason. Well, there's a term called pronoia that he coined, which is things are happening to you for a better outcome, to create a better outcome, right? So for example, you're running 5 minutes late to a meeting, jump in your car, you forget something in the house, you got to go back, you're 5 minutes late. Well, if you would have been on time, you would have been in that accident that's in the intersection. Okay, right? That's pronoia at work. And so I think what if we just flip the script, right, and think about this as a positive, hey, how do we get the biggest bang out of the buck? How do we create a greater return on invested capital if we're going to move in this direction? And then how do we level up? I think those are great thoughts, Dr. David. Thank you. Fernando, Kim, anything else to add to that?
No, hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, and just digging a little bit, and this is probably a precursor to one of our later questions, Mark, to double down on what Dr. David said. And this is for the cyber professionals out there, because I lecture and I teach. Part of what I teach is I teach up and coming CISOs how to function, survive, and do it better than I did for my PhD from the School of Hard Knocks many years ago. And one of the things you just alluded to, David, Dr. Dave, is one of the things I would tell the cyber professionals who are listening, or to the companies that are offering services for movement, gets to exactly what you said, Dr. Dave, and exactly what you said, Mark. One of the guidance things that I give to CISOs is, the first thing I tell people to do is to get with your business leaders, understand what drives them in the environment. But I take it a step further. Not just understand what their goals and objectives are for this year and how they make money, but understand what they're being bonused on, what they're being rewarded on within the environment. And then the question that I ask is, because as I'm looking to try and do something that could potentially draw their attention away from not what their primary revenue generation model is, but maybe drive their attention away from things that they perceive are going to put extra money in their pocket. So my question is, how is what I am doing, not just what, but how I do it, going to help you make your bonus this year? How is it going to help you drive that extra incentive? And if you can't answer that as a cyber professional, you're putting yourself aside from the business, which means you're not the solution, you're the problem. And I would echo, in shameless plugs, if the companies you're hiring aren't asking that question and approaching it that way, hire different companies, to include the ones here, because that is the way we drive within the environment. But again, gets back to what we've been talking about. It's a different mindset. It's a different focus, because I'm not waving a hammer saying you need to wedge this square peg into a round hole. I'm not sitting here and saying if you don't do this, the sky's going to fall. I'm trying to figure out, yes, look, there are going to be some things that are just going to suck, okay? There are going to be some things that we just got to do that just don't fit. But if I can sit here and relate what I'm doing to what's driving your revenue picture, and not just that, but your bonus calculations as business leaders, and say, if I do this, I can give you that unfair advantage, that speed to benefit, and that value, because I'm going to do it smartly, or show you how you can take this and then leverage it to drive what you're doing. Good cyber professionals do that. The average cyber professional doesn't think that way. And it's an indictment upon my profession that I love dearly, but it's true. Good cyber professionals do think that way. Find good cyber professionals who will approach the problem in a way that marries it to what your needs are, versus make it just a painful add-on.
Well said. Well said. And I think that's a great segue into the last question. And this is really a reflective question, and then we can move into Q&A, which is, gentlemen, in your opinion, what are the top 1, 2, 3 things? Doesn't have to be 3, but what are the top, couple of things that organizations can and should be doing to leverage CMMC to create an unfair advantage for themselves? And Dr. David, you already mentioned a couple of those just through use cases that you know of. But I'd be interested to hear from Fernando, Dr. David, and Kim.
Yeah. One, right, the implementation, right, early on, take your time, spread that cost out over time, right? It's a 6 to 8 month process. The last thing you want to do is having to do that. But the cost benefit to that will be that CMMC is starting with the DoD. You better rest assured that other agencies are looking at this. I know for a good one, for a perfect example, right, Today, you can go look at it. The General Services Administration, under their STARS 3 contract, has CMMC language in there. So it's only a matter of time before the other agencies pick it up. So the sooner you pick this up, the sooner you'll be able to go after other lucrative government contracts across various agencies. And to Kim's point earlier, right, once you've implemented something once, you now have this framework that you have in place that you'll be able to take to multiple agencies and make the best use of that cost benefit.
I love that. Dr. David?
Given everything we've talked about, there's only one I'm going to add here as far as competitive advantage, and that's take credit for your great work. Communicate compliance proactively, use it in the marketing and sales, differentiate yourself, take it as that competitive advantage of taking credit for the great work you're doing.
Well said. Kim, final thoughts?
Just a reiteration of things we've already said. Don't assume it doesn't apply to you. Don't try to eat the elephant in one single bite, and do figure out how this shows value and how it creates value. That's really it.
Well said. And I'll just wrap by saying I think a lot of what the panel communicated and what we talked about today is mindset. It's mindset and attitude. It's all about span of control. We know that regulations, right, compliance, laws, etc., aren't often top of mind for leaders, for executives. What's top of mind is customers, cash flow, right? Employees. Are my people showing up to work every day? Am I providing a great product or service, right, to my customers? And what's the viability of my business, i.e., what's my capital look like? What's my cash flow look like? I have to make payroll next week. So we know that those things are really top of mind, and oftentimes these types of regulations and laws and controls and things just fall into, yeah, it's just on my list I got to get to. But I think what we're saying is, if you reframe this as, man, this could be a massive velocity opportunity for your business, and you lean into those thoughts, then organizations like us and the experts that are on this panel can definitely assist. So with that, Frank, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. This was a great discussion, everyone. So we did get one question. This is for everyone. What are your observations and what are you hearing regarding whether investments in cybersecurity are being distracted or postponed given current economic and geopolitical uncertainties?
Anyone else want to take first out?
Yeah,
go for it.
Yeah, I'll take a run at that. So what we have seen for the last 3 years is investments in cybersecurity reduce in certain maturity levels of organizations that have customer bases. Let's just say they've gone through a Series A, a Series B, maybe even a Series C round, and they have significant product in the market, or service in the market. They have significant customers. They have significant distribution set up. Those organizations are actually getting capital. The smaller startups are not, and a lot of this isn't because of the environment, the political environment. A lot of this is because of AI. You saw a massive shift in the markets, venture capital, private equity, and angel markets, as well as just the market in general, shift in and start investing heavily in AI and AI-enabled technologies. And while you do have a significant number, the majority of the cybersecurity software providers in the marketplace today are embedding AI or refactoring around AI. They're not pure quote unquote AI plays. And so we've seen that over the last 3 years, and we've seen over the last 18 months even more significant money being funneled into AI. And then, of course, the next question is well, what's going to happen with quantum? Because there's still a significant amount of investment that's being routed towards quantum as well. And so we know, again, these are things that come in waves, right? So there was this massive excitement and sensationalism around cybersecurity. The markets followed, the venture money followed, the private equity money followed. Now there's a glut of vendors in the marketplace that are being consolidated. So you're seeing a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and that money is being directed through rolling up and consolidating certain sections of the marketplace. So that's what we're seeing on the financial and the economic side. Gentlemen, I don't know if you guys are seeing anything else.
Yeah, I'm going to take the question, Mark, in a different tack than you took it in terms of investment in technology and entrepreneurism, et cetera. And I want to take it from a standing business making decisions on whether or not to invest in cybersecurity or uplifting their tech, et cetera. And I love the term that you use, Mark, in terms of maturity, because I would submit that where we're seeing a pullback in that investment because of what's going on economically, geopolitically, insert adjective here, it has to deal with the maturity of the business and the organization. What I typically see when I come into organizations is if I'm dealing with a young organization that's trying to take market share, security becomes a secondary thought process because we're focusing on producing and taking market share from, the big competitors out there. And quite frankly, that's natural. And I would tell you that I would probably take, that approach as well. But there comes a point where, as Mark said, where you as a company have viability within the market space, where we need to understand that the bad guys are not going to go after other folks within the environment. And it gets to looking at security not as a tax, not as insurance, not as overhead, but it takes looking at security as to how we use this to drive value and show value to our customer base that's out there. For companies that have hit that level of not only viability, but frankly, maturity in their outlook, we are beginning to see some slight pullback, but that pullback is slight pullback in everyone in investing in services and capital investments until everything begins to stabilize. It's not just in cyber. For those companies who understand that in this market space you can create unfair advantage and there are opportunities to use your security infrastructure to help grow your market share, we're beginning to see not less investment, but I'm actually finding companies who are looking at it and trying to figure out where do we invest smartly to show that we're doing it slightly better than the average bear so that I can capture more customers that are out there. That's what I'm seeing. Gentlemen?
Uncertainty is never good for business. There's plenty of uncertainty out there. We're seeing slowdown in some investments. Kim, you described it well. It's across the board. It's not a CMMC question. It's just what's going on in the market and where do I put my cash and cash flow. The flip of this, I'll answer. First time in history we have a defense industrial strategy. That was rolled out a year ago. And then that strategy, it's very clear about supply chain priorities and what's going on. The investment and the prioritization of it from the federal government is not going to slow down, right? That part is maybe even gaining steam. So as a business, you're kind of facing this uncertainty. Where do I place my investments? Knowing that this topic is going to continue to move forward and perhaps moving forward at a even faster pace.
I do think that there's you've got this combination of things occurring, and Doctor, you've mentioned this a number of times, but the current kind of macro micro conditions of the market, right, at the Fed level, some of the things that are occurring around tariffs. I think you have that backdrop, but then I mentioned AI, and there's this. What I'm sensing, there's this unknown around just how pervasive this is going to be and just how big of a change it will be from a tech stack, from a technology, from a software perspective, and from an organizational design, from an operating perspective. And so I do think that there are organizations that are trying to figure out, do we invest now versus 12 months from now, 16 months from now, if AI becomes pervasive or becomes embedded in these technology and these platform stacks, if we invest now, did we just create technical debt? We already have technical debt. we're trying to replace that technical debt or address it or consolidate it. But the reality is we're in this other tectonic shift in the marketplace in terms of where technology is going. And so like I do sense that there's a pause that's like happening, like, okay, like how is this all going to play out? Do we actually know yet? And I don't think we know. I think it's gonna require some additional research and testing. And by the way, people can't stop business just because we don't know, right? Obviously, they're going to invest and continue to make decisions. But the reality is those are some of the dynamics that I'm seeing in the market.
Just one other comment, Mark, and I know I'm talking to the guy who literally co-wrote the book on AI and AI investment, quite literally. Without deep diving, it's probably a good topic for another webinar in terms of the impact of AI within the environment. The thing that you said about figuring out how it's going to impact our operational model, et cetera, what I have found, even anecdotally, is there are very few companies that says, that are in a point to say, tell me what your operational requirements are. Tell me, what the big, functional requirements and technical functional requirements are. I used to be a common criteria tester. I used to do that all the time. Now that you've done that, tell me where AI can probably play and make this better. And you don't have to be an AI guru to do that. The problem that we run into, which we see with a lot of new technology, and I've used this term with you before, Mark, is ready, fire, aim. Okay. we need agile. We need AI. Why? Because it's new. We need AI. You need AI to do what? AI is a wonderful tool. It is wonderful capability. It will continue to revolutionize. If you truly understand your operating requirements and model, figure out where it will plug in, maybe slow the investments on those pieces, or if you choose to invest in those pieces, choose to invest in companies that have a roadmap that will actually say, we're going to get here with this here. So instead of what is AI going to do in stopping, and I love the last point you made, is figure out what problem or challenge you want AI to solve, and then go invest accordingly. You do that, then you don't have to slow down. And a lot of companies aren't. They are reacting versus proacting.
Well said.
Great points.
Right.
Excellent. Thank you. So I hope everyone really gained some knowledge in today's webinar. At CTS, obviously, we're bringing the heavy hitters in, and we have some great partnerships with all these individuals. And that's because we do take our cybersecurity pretty seriously, and specifically in the manufacturing area. So a typical CMMC, very initial, to see the lay of the land assessment, typically is right around $1,600. For anyone who has attended today's webinar, if you go to onlinects.com/manufacturing, you can throw in the code CMMC 2025, and that initial assessment is complimentary for those who attended. And thank you for all. It looks like everyone except for one person stuck around, which is awesome for a webinar, and I apologize for going past our 45-minute initial mark. But our marketing people tell me that the smartwatch winner is, I'll do a little drum roll there, is Jim Ephraim. So Jim, if you're listening, hopefully you're still there, you will be getting a message from someone from my team, and you can pick Apple Watch or a Samsung Watch or whatever's on that list. So congrats on the win. And thank you to everyone. So thanks for everyone who attended. Mark, thank you as always, all the panelists. Thanks for your time. This was extremely knowledgeable. Even I gained a little bit of knowledge, which is always a good plus. And thank you, everyone, for sticking around.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. We'll do it again soon. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.